All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Um, Good morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Dianna Anderson. I'm the CEO of Cylient, and I appreciate you coming to join us for this dialogue about building stronger connections with our post pandemic stories. Um, at Cylient, we teach people how to use in the moment coaching in everyday conversations. And one of the things that we teach as a coaching approach is telling stories. Personally, I think that stories are incredibly profound, and that's why I wanted to create a dialogue around this topic and how, specifically in this moment of time, as we're starting to shift out of the pandemic, we can really tap into both our individual stories as well as our shared stories to find meaning in what we've gone through, to um, use our stories as a way of kind of changing the trajectory of our story, if you will, and making choices about where we want to go next. For those of you who are new to the dialogue, welcome. It's great to have you with us. What I wanted you to know is that the dialogues is really about being in conversation. So even though we're a small group today, I hope that you'll join in the conversation so that we can tap into your story. You can tap into your story, and we can talk about collectively how we can use the concept of listening for other people's stories and our shared stories as a way of creating really meaningful change in this very powerful moment in time. So, to that end, thank you. I think you're almost all on video. That's fantastic. If you could also use the chat as a way of communicating with each other, but we can actually just talk. We don't need to use the chat. We can just chat. But if you do have a question anywhere along the line, feel free to dump it into the chat if I'm in the middle of something, or come off mute and you can share it with me. So I think we can have a true dialogue today. So let's begin with this idea of story. And what I wanted to share with you to begin with is sort of how I use story professionally as a coach. So I began my coaching career in the early 90s. And one of the things that I discovered to do really quickly was to invite the professional clients that I was working with to share their life story with me. In fact, if you were going to be a coaching client with me, before we would even begin, as part of your assignment, I would ask you to tell me your life story in whatever way you felt moved to do that. And what I shared with people was it wasn't that we were going to tap into the past or do anything particularly with that. But what I wanted to know was what kinds of experiences had shaped the person's life so far. I also wanted to hear what appeared to be really important to that person, what mattered most to them. And I wanted to get some sense of why that was important. I also was listening for the assumptions and beliefs that the person had about their world and how those assumptions and beliefs might be limiting the experience that the person was having. Because I saw coaching as an inflection point in a person's life. Whether they arrived at coaching because they could feel that there was more potential for their own growth and they wanted the support to do that, or whether events had caused them to be offered the opportunity to receive a coach, maybe because they had received some feedback that wasn't, that they were maybe limiting themselves in some way, or because others saw the potential for them to grow. Whatever brought them to coaching, it was an inflection point in time, and that means it was a time where we could change their story. Not go back into it, but we could change the trajectory of where they were going by actually looking at the assumptions and beliefs that were driving the choices that they were making. And I believe personally that we are in a really powerful moment in time when not only individually we can do this, but collectively we can do it as well. And so I really would like to spend a little bit of time reflecting upon what our experiences have been as we've gone through the pandemic and what wisdom, what kind of insights we're drawing from that, and what we're doing with those insights that we have gained. And so I thought we would start with this on a personal level, and I'd like you to give thought to what is maybe one significant thing that you learned about yourself as a result of whatever you went through in the pandemic. And it's really important to notice that everyone had their own unique experience, you know, and for some, it was actually quite a positive experience. For some, it was incredibly disruptive and challenging. Whatever your experience was, I'd like you to take a moment and think about what's one significant thing that you learned about yourself as a result of what you have experienced. And then what do you plan to do with that insight? How will you make that a part of your own life going forward, either personally and or professionally? And I thought I might start by sharing an insight that I experienced as a result of what I went through and tell you what I'm planning on doing with it. And then I really would love to hear from some other people about what your experience has been and maybe some thoughts on what you might do with what you've learned. So prior to the pandemic, I was traveling all the time, incredibly busy. I like to tell people that I had earned platinum by June on one airline in 2019. That's how much I was on the road. And when my world abruptly stopped in March of 2020, it really threw me in a time of deep reflection. It certainly changed what was going on for here at Cylient, since the vast majority of our work came from people personally attending workshops, which they completely stopped doing. And so things went quite quiet for us. And in that quiet, one of the things, I personally got to do a lot of reflection. And one of the things I really began to notice about myself was how much armor I had built to kind of protect myself. How much I had learned to keep myself a little bit distant sometimes, or how much I'd learned actually that I was using busyness as a way of not necessarily stopping and making the deeper connections that I could. And it was when I stopped that I really saw what that was costing me. I saw that that was something that I came by honestly to be, um, you know, so it wasn't a bad thing per se. There were certain times in my life where having some protection around me allowed me to do the things I wanted to do. I've always felt a little bit different in the world that I've walked in. And so armor at sometimes helped me stay safe. But what I came to realize was, as I sat in this quiet, was that I didn't need it anymore. That was an old story for me, and one that was now really limiting my experience, both personally and professionally. So as a result of that realization, I really started to do some work to help myself kind of build some skills, I think, to be able to move out into the world without all of that protection. And so, as I think about what I want to do moving forward on a personal level, I'm really looking at making some deeper connections here where I live in Seattle and building more of a community around myself of friends and other colleagues. Because I haven't taken the time to do that since I moved here 3 years ago, other than some wonderful connections that I have through professional organizations and others. But there are some, I'd like to deepen that. And that was a realization I came to. And professionally, I think what I would like to do with that is actually probably take on some bigger challenges professionally and include revealing a little bit more of myself in the work that I do. So these were some gifts that I came out of the pandemic with, and frankly, things I'm just playing with. These are not things that I've accomplished per se. These are just ideas that I am kind of moving forward with. So I'd love to hear from others. Is there any insight that you gained about yourself, and just what might you want to do with that as you begin to move out into the world. I'd love to hear from anyone who'd like to share. So feel free to just come off mute and share your story with our little group here.
Hey Diana, it's Julie. I'll go first.
Fantastic.
So during the pandemic, I have been working from home since last March as well, March of 20. And I absolutely love working from home. I'm such a workaholic that I was working all day at the office and then coming home and doing more work and work. And I find that since I'm at home, I've developed a much better work-life balance.
Wow.
Yeah, because I don't mind getting up and going to do stuff that I need to get done during the day that I could never get done during the day before. And I'm saving an hour and a half of drive time every day where I can be more productive and do other things. So even though I found I was actually working longer hours, they weren't consecutive hours.
Mm.
So I was able to accomplish more in spurts and still take care of a whole lot more stuff at home. And what I'm going to do with that, I'm never going back to the office full time again.
I
If
love
as long as telework is an option, I'm going to continue to telework,
it.
whether it be full time or only part time. But I don't think I will ever go back to a straight, 8 to 4, 9 to 5 in the office all the time job again.
Beautiful, beautiful. So one thing I might thank you for sharing that. And here's the coach in me. It's going to reflect a little something back to you because that's just what I do. I hear that you really came to honor a very different kind of life balance for yourself. Would that be fair to say that you brought your life into a little bit more of a balance, maybe not balanced, but more balanced, where you're really honoring what's important to you as well as what was important professionally? With that, am I close?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly it. I'm taking time to do the things I need to get done for
Mhm.
me and for the family,
Nice.
in addition to all of the work stuff. And even though I'm not doing a whole lot of work right now, I'm not so disconnected that anything I'm responsible for is going to fail in my absence.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you're learning all kinds of things. How to manage something from a distance, how to bring things into balance. These are beautiful gifts to come out of what's been a challenging experience. Thank you for sharing. Anybody
Oh,
else?
my pleasure.
Anybody else want to share something that has changed for you? An insight that you've gained about yourself and what you're going to do with it as we move forward.
All right. I'm willing to say a couple words.
Thank you.
Like you, I flew every week, and I was in New York at IBM in Westchester, right where it all started, and flew out like a day before Westchester closed down. And I I also love staying home.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have a full office in my home, and what I learned is that um, I'm used. I love and I'm used to talking to people, seeing people,
Mm-hmm.
and that I don't necessarily have to. That Zoom works fine, and I
Sure.
can even do better looking at faces
Mm-hmm.
on Zoom and do my work. And I also learned that that in dialogue, there's so much more learning, better than PowerPoints and doing a talk.
Nice.
And so where I want to go is thinking about how do I offer my work through dialogue more. And that I realize that's the topic of your session is dialogue. So there are learnings, definitely.
Oh, wow. So I hear just a gorgeous shift in your work and how you want to express it in the world.
Right.
And one that I'm guessing is going to really have some very positive impact for you personally as well as professionally. Is that fair?
Right. And it's figuring out how to announce to clients
Mm-hmm.
that this is possible. So we shall see.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk in just a minute about how shared stories can influence behavior. So let's talk, because one of the things we want to do is talk about how we bring our individual stories and connect with others around it,
Right.
around these stories in order to create change on a different level. But before I do that, let me just check, is there anybody else who wanted to share a learning that you've had about yourself and what you're going to do with it? Is if we're good, anybody got one? If we're good, we could move on. Awesome. Okay. So one of the things I want you to notice, thank you, both Julie and Bob, for sharing your insights. And one of the things I really want you to notice is that what was driving all of the choices that each of us was making was the assumptions and beliefs that we had about how things should be. You know, for me, my assumption or belief was I was safe if I was like, fairly well protected. You know, for Julie, maybe it was more along the lines of assumption or belief that there wasn't enough time in the day, to get everything done, that work had to always take precedent. That's an assumption or a belief, right? And for Bev, you were used to a more formal style of presentation and being with people, and voila, discovered, hey, maybe actually there was other ways of doing things. And what I think is really incredibly amazing right now is that because not only each of us has gone through this experience and had our assumptions and beliefs shaken, and we're creating some new ones, but so has everybody else in the entire world. I don't think there's ever been a time when the entire world has had itself shaken to the core so profoundly, which means that we can shift stories on any level. And I think a really fantastic way to think about this is when we begin to reconnect with the people that matter to us, but maybe who we have not connected with through the pandemic. Personally, that is. Certainly there's lots of people we've connected with, through Zoom and other means. But as teams come back together, as friends gather again, socially, as families actually come back and see each other again, as community groups come back and see each other again. I think it is a profound moment to recheck in with each other and greet each other, the new person that has shown up, because each of us is new in some way. And each of us has shifted our assumptions or beliefs about the world in some way. And this also allows us to collectively, whether it's as a team, a family, um, even as an organization, to actually shift our assumptions and beliefs. And so, one of the practices that I would love for people to consider engaging in is fairly soon as people return to actually devote some time to hearing each other's stories. Now, of course, we've got to do this respectfully, and not everyone might want to share their story in great detail. But I think asking people, even just things like sharing, what was most impactful for you as you went through this experience? Um, what are things you recognize you want to leave behind? You can hear each of us has something we're kind of done with. It's like we're not going back to that now that we know what life feels like without it. I think it would be important to ask people, what are they complete with? I think it's also going to be really important to check in with people about what matters most to them now. I personally, in the dialogues I've been in, have heard a lot of people have some shifting priorities, where maybe work was the thing before, or meeting other people's expectations was the thing before. Now, sometimes there's a greater honoring of their own personal space and the importance of it. We can hear that in the conversation we're having here today. Some people have a greater sense of purpose. You know, it's not enough right now for them just to be busy. They want to focus their energy to make a difference, to answer some of the questions that, you know, our experience of 2020 have kind of brought to the fore for us. For other people, family or friends have become much more important, and they want to devote more time to developing those relationships. Whatever it is, it's really important, I think, that we hear from each other. So whether you gather your group of friends together or, you know, as a team reconfigures, how do we listen and hear what is truly most profoundly important to each of us? And then I would really invite us all in these gatherings to ask the question, what assumptions or beliefs might we want to change? And that might look like, what rules or expectations do we have for ourselves that we're willing to shift? And so it could be things like in a team. Maybe the team will say, you know what, we do not want to be traveling at the rate that we were before. Let's shift our assumptions and beliefs about how we work so that we can create new ways of being just as effective or maybe even more than we were before, but doing it in some new ways. It might also be a group of friends that comes together and really kind of shares deeply about what their experiences were. And maybe it's okay now to say no to an event. Maybe we don't have to have FOMO, you know, our fear of missing out quite as deeply as we did before. Maybe we have more of a fear of missing out on ourselves instead of always being part of whatever the latest action is. It's personal choices, but I think when we articulate them to each other, we can create new spaces. And here's what I know is that after, you know, 20 plus some years of coaching, I know that when you change your assumptions and beliefs about what's important and what's real, and you actually learn the skills and take the action to really embody what that new belief is, you can change the trajectory of your story. And I think that we have the opportunity to do that. And so I'm hoping, so I was curious, as you think about the groups that you belong to, are there any kind of new assumptions and beliefs or a new rules or expectations that you would request that people put into place, whether it's for your team, your family, maybe for some friends? What would you like to see shift in terms of how you, um, the agreements that you have with others in your life?
I'll actually chime in here if that's okay. But I think during the pandemic, my friend group has really been promoting setting boundaries on, you know, if we ask for a last minute Zoom hang, they don't always have to say yes to that. Or kind of what you were saying about FOMO, we're trying to limit the amount of FOMO in the friend group to just make sure people are comfortable saying no to things. And then what has been really interesting is that we are promoting setting these boundaries, but then respecting those boundaries on the other side has been way more challenging than we thought. Where when people do say no to something, our immediate intuitive reaction is to be like, oh, they must not like me today, or they must, you know, we automatically make an assumption about their emotional state or something that's going on in their lives, which is not true. So it's been interesting, but I think as we go forward, we'll get more used to that. And I do think kind of making that rule of it's okay to say no and having boundaries. And, you know, if you only want to do 3 or 4 social activities this week, that's fine. So I think it's a good thing going forward.
Oh, beautiful. Thanks so much for sharing that. And Beth, that really illuminates an important element, which is we're not going to get this exactly right the first time. Like we will meet our old assumptions and beliefs as we create new ones. And that was a great illustration. You know, we're going to give each other grace around, you know, showing up for these social activities, but there's a part of us that still reacts when that happens. And we should expect that and build that into the change process, but not let that defeat our intention to change. And, again, just like in coaching, clients set intentions to change, and it's often, two steps forward, one step back. And um, as a coach, we always celebrate the intention to try things that are new. And when things don't turn out as expected, one of the things that we want to do is just notice what might have contributed to that and own what is ours and engage in conversation about what is shared. And in that way, we can build new assumptions and beliefs that support these new lives that we're creating for ourselves. There are so many people that are, frankly, I think, terrified that we're going to go back to what we had, that we won't actively take measures or to kind of put stakes into what we've come to value. And frankly, if we don't put stakes in the ground, we probably will slide back into a lot of our old expectations of each other and beliefs about how things work. So it's really important time to really invest in the things that we value the most, that we've come to value as a result of the experiences we've had in the pandemic. And I would tell you that this is true even beyond, the groups that we gather with. Everything and everybody has a story, right? Your organization has a story about what they stand for, what's important, who we are in the world. Our communities have stories. In fact, all the things that, biggest questions that came up in 2020 about equity and justice and racial inequality and inequality of many kinds, um, and so much more. Even questions that have come up around how we will work together. All these things, there's a story that is behind them. And I think one of the most powerful things that we can do, both individually and collectively, is start to really get much better at hearing the story that goes on behind the behavior. Because every choice that we make is founded in a story that we have about why it matters or why something is the way that it is. And I think to the extent that we really sort of slow down, notice when things happen, rather than having a reaction to it, whether it's good, bad, right, or wrong, what if we just got curious about the story that was driving that choice? And what if collectively we could look at some of the assumptions and beliefs that were keeping that story in place and redecide for ourselves whether that was still true? And that's really the power of stories, if you will. When we get really good at reflecting upon our stories, we get really good at seeing the assumptions and beliefs that we have about how the world works. And that is what brings our ability to choose again online. And we've got to get really good at this right now because we can make a lot of big choices, I think, to do things differently as a result of the fact that everyone is in this process. Mm-hmm. I also believe that stories are how we harvest our knowledge, our understanding, and our wisdom from the experiences that we've had. What's the point of going through an experience if we don't actually gain something from whatever that was? And it doesn't have to be it could be a positive experience and we discover what we love and enjoy. It could have been, a really challenging experience that caused us to have to grow in some way or, move through maybe some emotions that were not easy to move through, but that have changed us in some positive way. We will not harvest these things unless we take time to reflect, both individually and collectively. And that would be an incredible loss, I think, for us not to actually spend the time harvesting the wisdom that is available to us now, and translating the insights that we have gained into really positive change on every level. So that's my hope, is that by focusing on our stories, we can glean the gifts that were here for us, even when they were difficult ones, and support each other moving forward to take the key insights that are most important to us and really translate them into new ways of thinking and being together, and ultimately new ways of creating what is going to come. Let me stop there and just ask if there's any insights, observations anyone wants to share around what I've shared so far.
You know, I love the idea of story, and in fact, there is a book called Story Intelligence that some of you might like. And Diane, I want to introduce you to the author because
Fantastic.
I think you two would get along. And I think sometimes we feel we don't have time to listen to a story.
Mhm.
And when we want to tell a story, um, is it going on too long, or do I have the attention of the listeners? Because, I know a few people who are story heavy. We don't tell, don't, oh, so there is an art to telling and an art to listening and contributing,
Yeah,
instead of then making it your story.
right,
You know how people move too quickly too. Now let me tell you about me.
right.
Um, so a lot in that conversation.
Yes, absolutely. And this really, thank you for that, points to um, an important element, which is in many ways we don't necessarily have the skills to do this extremely well. And what you're pointing towards, Bev, is can we listen? Do we have good inquiry skills that help us ask stories in support of others? Can
Right,
we remain centered enough ourselves without getting kind of caught in, our own internal story while we're listening to somebody else's? These are all skills to.
right,
Um, but I'm going to say skills that we are going to need if we're going to create the kind of change that 2020 and beyond has invited. I mean, we have the opportunity to truly rewire how we are together, to create a more just and equitable world, to build organizations that have a deep sense of purpose that people migrate to, that they feel connected to. But all of these things will be predicated on fundamental skills such as listening, such as asking questions, such as honoring that someone has a different story than you without having to change it. Can you just hear it without having to correct it or, take issue with it in some way? These are foundational skills for any kind of change. And personally, I think a great way to begin to practice is processing what we've just gone through, using it as a way to, even if it is just individually, to make change in our lives. But hopefully, when we practice collectively, we're building the muscles that we need to really take advantage of this moment of time and make much more sweeping change collectively. Any other insights or observations anyone would like to share today?
It's Julie. I've got just one more.
Okay.
So I am on the board of directors for a local 501c3 company that is in the area. And previously, we had wanted all of the officers of the board of directors to be local residents so that, we could go in for meetings. But over the last year plus, we have become quite adept at doing Zoom meetings. And when we met yesterday, we decided that, hey, all of our officers don't have to be local anymore. You know, we've all gotten pretty good at this Zoom thing, so eh, as long as we can contact each other and there's at least one person in the area who can sign documents, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got a whole new business model for the board of directors going forward, where not all of the officers have to be local area residents.
Love that. Yeah, thank you. Beautiful example of how we can rethink what we're doing. And we can do this on any level. And we can take advantage of technology and our new open thinking and really craft lives and businesses that work for us, as well as, you know, working to deliver on their purpose and whatever that may be. So beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here as part of this conversation. I'd encourage you, if you're interested, to check out a blog that I just wrote. I can remember what it's called. Well, it's what is it? It's about meeting and greeting our post-pandemic selves, and there's some tools that are in there, some good questions that you can use to go out and connect with others. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And I really encourage you to just dive into your own story and really find the wealth that is there for you and encourage others to do the same, because this is such an incredibly important period of time. And I think we've got the opportunity to reshape our individual and shared stories in some really fantastic and positive ways. So if there's anything we can do at Cylient to support you, please reach out. And I hope that we'll see all of you at our next dialogue. So thank you again. Bye for now.